Welcome, greetings, everybody. This is Wesley Pepper. Welcome to the Art Lexcia podcast. This is episode 237. I've actually been I haven't been doing much recording if you've been following my channel maybe for a few weeks, but there's been a lot of scheduling nightmares around that and one or two other things. But yeah, all that shit is over and done. But anyway, enough of that. Today we're talking to Flow Wellington, a poet. Is it right to call you an entrepreneur? Yeah, I think I will put that. Is that
Yeah, I
you
would
are an
say that.
entrepreneur?
I would say an entrepreneur. Yes, I would say an entrepreneur.
Because the other one is
There's a lot of fancy words that float around. A
yeah,
lot of people use artpreneur
yeah,
or
that's what I'm saying. Social entrepreneur. I called
yeah,
myself. Was
but
it Is it yeah? I called myself that for a while. I don't do that anymore. I want to get paid. I'm a capitalist now.
yeah,
Uh, I think I spent maybe 20
we got to
years.
move out of survival mode.
Yeah. I try to help people, and I found out that I need the help. I need the help. So if you're gonna help me, yeah, we'll help. We'll help everybody. Maybe my life was the other way around. People first help. Yeah. Anyway, Flo, my sister, it's good afternoon. Welcome. How are you?
Taveres, greetings. I'm well, thank you. I'm well.
Thank you for taking the time out, man, and everything. Like I mentioned off air, there's a lot to unpack with regards to your journey in the arts. Let's just start at the beginning, man. Just give us an overview. Like, where did your I guess where did it all start, or how did it all start? How did you decide that I'm gonna pick up a pen and I'm gonna make a living off of this, as opposed to going to work for Standard Bank or some shit like that, or some office job somewhere?
I knew you were going to ask this question, and I was thinking about it last night as I was just mentally preparing. And it's such a layered answer because I started very young, very, very young. I was still in primary school when the writing bug and publishing bug bit me. And I mean, obviously, I was an obsessive reader. I was maxing out my library card every week. But when I was around 11, 12, and I mean, my grandparents had the full encyclopedia collection, the whole Reader's Digest. So I was reading by 10, 11, I was reading Ulysses and Moby Dick and, that sort of thing. But apart from that, what actually got me to thinking, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. When I was 11, 12, we had this project at our primary school called the Global Stories Project. And I was in my last year of primary school, so I was about to leave. And they were only taking in 10 and 11-year-olds. And I insisted I was going to be part of this group because this is my last year of primary school. I'm going out with a bang. And they were like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. So what we did was we used to record stories. We used to workshop stories and, we'd have short stories. So I started with short story writing. And a lot of people think I started as a poet, but I started as a short story writer because we would write these short stories and we would send them to a school in England and they would send their stories to us,
Oh, I
So,
see that.
and then,
Yeah.
and one particular day we were on a field trip and we were doing gallery hopping, so to speak. So we were visiting all the art galleries in PE and there was a TV crew there and everything. And we were tasked to write a poem. And at that point, I was writing short little poems for school and, but we were tasked to write a poem. And I still have that poem from 1996. We had to choose a painting and write an acrostic poem on the title of that painting. And that was the first time I had written a poem. And that poem had won me the award that year for Best Writer in the Global Stories Project. And that's when I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I was it's weird because my knowledge and introduction and access was very colonial. So I wasn't reading South African literature, to be honest,
Most of us.
But yeah, and all through school, I was very, very into writing and submitting. And by the time I was 14, 15, I had already published with Poetry Institute of Africa and all sorts of,
What?
um, you know, and nobody knew because I published under an alias, and I didn't share any of that. I would just do my own thing because, back then when we had the Huisgenoot and Foschini books and Edgar's books, and they had these little, you know, write an essay on this, that, and the other, and send it to this, and you had to
I
post
remember.
it and get a stamp. And so I would do
Mm.
all those things, and one day our head librarian said, we do have an actual published poet in our community. Why don't you take your stuff to him and he can have a look at it and see if it's got potential to go any further? And 14 years old, I'm cocky. I'm like, yeah, I'm a writer. I'm good. I'm published. And I took it. I'm not sure if you know Vincent Olifant. I took it to him, all my little notebooks, and we sat for an afternoon and he read and he said to me, you know what? I think you should just stick to short stories. Your poems are not that good. Man, I was devastated. I was devastated. I was like, what does this man know? I publish with big institutions. My poems are in international anthologies. What do you know? But I pushed on. And I workshopped and I attended workshops and, opportunities that were not familiar in our community at the time. I made sure that I got little bits here and there wherever I could. And obviously, when you're older, you get into Def Jam poetry. There was Flowetry that came up, and that influenced a lot of my performance style. I remember when I was performing in PE back then a lot, I would always be introduced as PE's Jill Scott. And it was okay, when you're coming up, you being revered in that way and being compared to a big star. But I wanted really to form my own identity, and a lot of it became rooted in reclaiming identity as well, because the style that we were seeing at the time was very Americanized, and everybody had a twang, and there was all sorts of gimmicks on stage, and then I was like, this is not, it's not me, and I struggled a lot also with freestyling. I struggled a lot with you know um performing without reading. And it's like, you know what? I need to really be myself. I need to claim myself in this. And I totally reinvented the whole identity of who Flo was on stage. I was unashamed about going on stage with a paper or a book, or I was like, I read, guys. I read my work, and that's the early stages of it. I mean, there's a lot. Like I said, it's layered.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah,
layered,
no.
but that's really how I got that's how I got started.
Very cool, man. I have to ask, in where in PE are you from? Originally from?
Originally Galvindale, of course, the one
Where in
everybody
Galvin?
loves.
Where in
Galvindale, Van
Galvin?
Dieren Street. Yeah, Van Dieren Street.
Okay, Van Dieren
If
Street
you
doesn't
if
ring
you
a
know
bell.
where St. Thomas is, if you know where Chapman High is,
With that one,
that
I.
yeah.
Okay.
I went to St. Thomas High,
Um,
by the way.
it's been. I spent. My mother's from the Eastern Cape. I
Okay, yeah.
my early 20s, so the late
Mm.
90s, early 2000s. I mean, I stayed there for 3, maybe 2 years, maybe longer. But I know I used to party, especially in the 90s. Like the sweeper taxis, La Di Da, Godfather. I grew up. Those are
I think about those
some of my
days
best memories.
often.
Some of my best memories were there.
Like, how were we living with those taxis? I don't,
I'm sure most of
and
those
my
guys are
sensory
dead.
memory. My sensory memory is so attached to that era because it was mainly in my high school time
Mm.
that when I hear certain songs, I am
Yeah,
placed right
yeah,
there in a
yeah.
taxi
It
going
triggers
to
that
school or
memory.
coming from school.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi,
No,
it's crazy.
those
It's
are
crazy.
one of the stuff that used to always grab me at Clary Park. They used to always gather
And
opposite the road there. So that type of energy around that
yeah,
because very good friends of mine stayed not literally walking distance from there. And so I used to go there
yeah.
in the morning and like the energy uh
Oh, it was a
I
culture, hey?
it was and it was
It was
I'm
an
glad I lived through it.
entire culture.
Then they used to push what like 30 people in that taxi. Sometimes it felt
Right?
like more people will be sitting on top of somebody, and then you still must pay the gachi so with your left hand. It was you must still check
And
where you
and
you
somehow,
can't make it.
everybody paid. Even if it was 1 rand or 2 rand, everybody paid.
Those were very good memories. Yeah, you also mentioned death the poetry jam that influenced a lot of people, especially Saul Williams. I know many poets that were deeply not always necessarily by his actually poetry, but his performance stance. The way he performs. And that's actually quite an interesting, but because you also mentioned there that a lot of the people you were consuming weren't local writers.
Mm.
And I think that's actually an interesting point. So I guess when what local or African based writer, poet, artist, started, influenced you, let me put it like that. And I'm talking like early
I think
20s type of thing before we get to,
mm,
you as an adult.
I think when I started reading people like Diana Ferris and your Don Materas, because now I was at varsity and the library was bigger and there was more access and there was a greater variety of books, and also because of certain books were now unbanned after apartheid time, so there was access to those sort of things, but also our local poets, PE poets, they got me very inspired to consume local work. So I was attending poetry gigs. I was attending sessions and workshops, and so there you get to see people. And then obviously the obvious thing was when Latitude came on TV and Lebu Mashile
Yeah,
was a great influence. I think many of us who come from that era was
yeah,
influenced by Leb. Um,
yeah.
but I think more so consuming my immediate community was what really had a great influence on me, because people were now writing and performing in vernac, and that was a great thing for me because the audience that I had was it was so very, very different to the community that I came from, which was English Afrikaans. So now you get exposed to language and culture, and that got me thinking about how do I then bring influence of my culture and my heritage into these sort of spaces.
Do you write and perform in Afrikaans?
I do, as I got older, more so, yes. Um, in my mid-20s, I did a lot of commission work, so I would get asked specifically to write in
Mm,
Afrikaans, especially a lot of corporate stuff.
mm,
Um, but I found that the more rooted I got in my calling, the more the more Afrikaans writing I did through dream work. So my Afrikaans writing,
understood.
and I find that a lot of the poems that I have in Afrikaans first came to me in dreams before actually sitting with them and saying, I'm going to write an Afrikaans poem. So I associate that more as a guide. rather than just writing.
Interesting. You familiar with the poet Adam Small?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so um he was probably the I thought about this the other day, in fact. He was probably the first Afrikaans poet who's firstly I enjoyed his work, but I met him actually in
Mm,
high school. Um I was at this what do they call it, Model C schools back then. Long story was there, we met him and this and this and this and that. And I remember him writing. I can actually paraphrase one of the lines, but he was obviously he was from a Cape. He was talking about I think he was walking around some I can't remember, but he was drinking Coke or can of Coke, and he referenced that in his work. And as a lighty, because like you mentioned, I also got brought up on mostly writers based in the UK, which I could never relate to. That's why there was a
mhm.
complete blank for me. And all of a sudden, here's this writing, and he's talking about drinking from a Coke can. And I'm like, how can you? I was like, what is that even doing there? Like, this is not formal. It's not what you were supposed to expect.
Exactly.
And that actually broke a lot of, uh, uh, I guess, barriers. And I realized, oh shit, but people can actually write about it and be celebrated. And in his vernacular, of course. I mean, I think he passed away years ago. But yeah, I thought I know, just thought I'd share that one.
No,
But you
for
were
sure, I
mentioning about
relate to that because
no, sorry,
when
continue.
we consume in our own language and when we consume from our own community, we realize that writing style and writing rules differ. And that sort of leans more into how you define your own writing as well, and how you are able to express your own writing because you become more comfortable in that writing. There are obviously standard things that apply, but people who write in Afrikaans or
Mhm.
that sort of thing, you and they when I first heard poems in Afrikaans, I was mortified. I was like, there's no structure that's being held, and I had to decolonize my mind in that sense that there's an entire different style that we speak in. There's an entire different language, dialect, flow, and I don't know. I can go on and on about it, but yeah, I get it.
Now, now the same year, the same that part was moving, and it changed the way I thought. So, I mean, on my side, I'm a visual artist. I mean, I've never published any form of writing. I don't think I'm a good writer, and I always it's funny. Like I I enjoy text as a shape and as a form as opposed to an actual like poem and such. Like a lot of my work is full of text. There's a anyway. I want to branch off into something formal, but I want to bring it back to your work. Yeah. Um. Okay. So sort of now you're in your early 20s or in your 20s there about uh you started to see through this Western indoctrination that we've all been subjected to. I mean, that time, early 2000s, a lot of change. Mbeki did his I'm an African speech.
Mm,
That also had a big. I was in Joburg already that time. That I remember that time they called it the African Renaissance, and I
mhm,
was like, oh shit, like I'm here, I'm in the epicenter of all of this. I wanna I wanna be part of it. I wanna you know, I wanna express myself and
mm.
so forth. It was actually a great time. I'm thinking back. Um, um, are you a Pan Africanist? Do you consider yourself a Pan Africanist?
Terms like that, I always ask people, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Um, I I don't want to say yes and I don't want to say no. I am I am patriotic in the sense that I am African. I I choose Africa above all. Um, I do have a lot of international countries that I have visited and that I love, but home soil is home soil for me. Um, in the work that I do, I prioritize African work. In the people that I relate to and the people that I include in my inner circle, I prioritize Africa. When it comes to visionary work in terms of projecting how I want projects to go, I prioritize Africa in that sense. Obviously, South Africa being first and then the broader continent. If that makes me Pan-Africanist, I guess. Um, Things that I learn when I travel. And a lot of people will probably crucify me for saying this. And it's something that I think that we as a country and a continent can learn from. Countries are for their people. Their systems are set up for their people. Their laws are set up for their people. Schools, education, it's very centered around how well they can provide for their people, right? And then foreigners have an issue and say we are struggling with this and we are struggling with forms and we are struggling with red tape and that and that. But it's not your country, you know. And I'm saying this very loosely and broadly, especially with where we are right now in
Yep.
our political environment. When a country is really set up for each other, things work better. When we service each other, when we have that Ubuntu, when we, and I'm not saying this to isolate other people. I mean that when we, and I'm gonna cliche it a bit. When you get your house in order, you know, then everything else can be in order. And I think we can learn a lot from that in terms of our Pan-Africanism, if you want to say that.
Yeah. That's yeah, yeah, I hear you. Um, I had to kind of sneak that question is because as you mentioned, like what's happening currently, uh, I've got like serious opinions on that, and I mean that deadline is next week. In fact, um, as an
You know,
entrepreneur,
Wesley, I've been staying off social media, and I've been really not. I've been holding back on commenting on things, and because it's very volatile and it's a landmine. It's a landmine.
yeah, yeah, they call
But
it
yeah, it's
a powder cake or what a gun one anyway, something that is about ready to explode. Yeah, no, I agree. And also just as an entrepreneur, it's not good for me. Yeah, shit, man. There's a bunch of things I want to say, but I want to sort of watch my mouth because I'm also really I try to be incredibly disciplined in like what and how I say things. Given that things get like out of context and stuff like that. And
yeah,
I was in an online spat yesterday actually. Um, and it's I've trying to after usually I go off social media around about 8 o'clock. The only social media platforms I'll be on is YouTube and Threads, maybe and Instagram, but but very sporadically. Because yeah,
mm,
that thing is overwhelming. And there's actually something I don't necessarily want to go down this rabbit hole, but I do want to make this point, like also because talking to artists since the hard lockdown, uh, things has become like a lot worse. Uh, Politically, social politically, and economically. And it's impacting artists. It's impacting how we produce,
yeah,
what we produce, and where we're selling it to. And that's actually, you know, uh, 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 what I sort of wanted to get into because you did start a publishing house. You were publishing the local rights and so forth. And I think you mentioned offline that like the business doesn't, you close it down because of COVID and so forth. But like, can you just give us like sort of an overview on that? Like, a poetry publishing, who were they about? What did you guys do, and sort of when and
mhm.
why did it like come to an end?
So when I moved to Joburg was 2011. I had wild ambitions. I was going to, be a Joburg poet because that was the big thing. You come here and you make it. This was considered our New York, right? If you can
Yeah.
make it here,
Yeah.
then you can make it
Make it
anywhere.
anywhere.
So I had come and yeah, I had come to I'd come to record a poetry album. I was going to, that sort of thing. Personal things didn't go right. Relationship wasn't working out. There's a lot of background story. And I know a lot of people who have read How Trained, my second book, they have a bit of brief. But then I figured, okay, I came here to do this work. Let me put out a feel for, publishing. Let me get published. And I struggled for quite some time, um, publishing houses saying, no, we're not accepting poetry. No, we don't publish poetry. We don't publish young poets. It was a struggle. It was a struggle. And it got me thinking, if I'm struggling, who's considered at the time to have paid my dues, I'd been in the industry for a while, I have got the track record, etc., etc. If I'm struggling to get published as a poet this way, there must be other people who are struggling as well. And I didn't know much about self-publishing. I jumped right into it. I published my first book. I self-published my first book, and it was a little tiny little chapbook. And I researched the heck out of it, did a lot of internet study, and, did all the design work myself because I was just as determined I was going to do this by myself. And that leap for me was what I needed to leap further into it. The following year, a year or two after that, I wasn't really, I was between things, let's put it that way. But then randomly somebody came to me and said, oh, I'd like to publish. Can you help me? And I assisted and we published. Then somebody else came and, I helped them. And that's how it went. Somebody asked me, um, I've never seen ads for poetry. And I'm like, I've never advertised for poetry publications. Never. I maybe did like your boosted ads when that became a thing,
Yeah.
later on for workshops and things. Yeah. But word of mouth, Wesley, word of mouth was how poetry publications grew.
That's a good
From
point.
and I was very intentional on, in the beginning when you start something and you don't really know what's going on and you're just going with it. I made a lot of mistakes. I undercharged people. I didn't make any profit because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to charge, but you learn along the way. But eventually, when now people were coming to me who you don't address on their first name or Mr. or whatever, you call them Prof or Doc. And I was like, yeah, we're in the big leagues. We're in the big leagues now, And I took some time out to really craft what poetry publications meant at the time. And my grandfather, when he was alive then, he was like, this is legacy that you need to move with now. This is what your name is going to forever be attached to. And I was very intentional about quality work being produced, about African stories being produced, about language being archived, about history being archived, about what self-publishing meant in the industry, in the broader industry of publishing, and how it was changing and how it was being shaped by women of color, especially, So I became very selective on who I was publishing now. I wasn't in, and it wasn't even because I could charge more. It wasn't because I was now being bougie, but it was really because I was now building something that was going to be cemented in the industry for however long I could carry it. So along the way, it was just one person and then another. In some years, I was doing 2 books a year. Other years I was doing 5 books a year until self-publishing it became synonymous with poetry publications, or poetry publications became synonymous
That's
with
a very good
self-publishing.
point. That's another
And
very, very
when,
good point.
and particularly for poets,
Mm.
I did obviously do, other genres, but for poets themselves, I wanted to be very accessible. Um, as much as it's not a cheap thing, I wanted to be as affordable as possible, because it was important that there's good work out there, there's good writing out there, there's good artists out there. And I wanted that to be part of our African literature legacy.
Interesting story, man. You mentioned there's two things I sort of want to touch on before we move on there. You made a point there about poetry, about advertising poetry work. As you said, I was, in the background thinking that you are right, because I don't ever remember an ad. Word of mouth, yeah. The art industry in general is actually very small. With any of my international listeners there, and I've mentioned it in previous episodes. Everybody knows everybody. Through one person, to two people, you can practically meet anybody. It doesn't matter how high up
Mm.
or low up. It's a real small industry, and yeah, the word of mouth. That's also where reputation comes in.
I
Yeah,
mean,
reputation means a
a
lot there.
practical example. Sorry to cut you there. A practical
Please go
example.
for it.
When the first few books came out, I was not even familiar with indie bookshops or how to get into bookshops or that sort of thing. But people would from Sweden send me photos and be like, "Oh, look who we see here," and it will be like in Sweden, but from where? How? And that sort of movement in the arts, in literature, and especially earlier when I came into the industry, that was a big thing for me because I'm very mindful of the gatekeeping. There's certain things that felt very untouchable at that time. So I was very happy and very glad when I saw that someone who published with me managed to get onto shelves or got commissioned, or books were being selected for Department of Education or for libraries or that sort of thing.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. It's a tiny industry, and like I mentioned, reputation is built of talent. Um, Call me old school, but I think that's the only way to go. I think as much as that unregulated industry is messed up and it's got many pitfalls, tons of it, because there's a lot of exploitation through that because it's not regulated. But
Mm.
if your talent speaks, whereas I mean, in the age we're living in now, you can do something to your device, and there's all these tools that you can, gimmick up everything. And yeah, like I do believe that our generation is possibly the last one to do that, where your reputation is purely based off your talent. Um, you mentioned also there about about gatekeepers and not being allowed on their publishing house or platform, and then say like, okay, now I'm just gonna build my own. That's actually quite another interesting point. That just to give you some insight, that cuts across all genres. In fact, I'm from a visual art background, and it's the same. It was the same. The only way to galleries will turn you down, not because of your work, because they just don't want to sell your work, or they say that their clientele won't buy your work. It's as black and white as that. And if you do your own gig, get some friends or whatever, just do your own thing, and you do it long enough, you can actually be successful. I've actually spoken to a few artists from across genres, or writing, even up to some musicians that make a living, maybe not a great living, but they make a living off of it. And I think that shit is fascinating, man. I think it needs to be profiled, because I think that type of thing gets overlooked, when it comes to art, because unfortunately people outside of the arts only look at judge you via various gatekeepers because they will champion your name and so forth. And I think in order to do that, you mentioned you were learning on the go. That's that takes a hell of a lot because now you must do accounting and admin stuff. And you mentioned, like, how do you charge? Even today I still don't know how much. If someone was asked me to do this or do that, the number you just pull out of your backside, there's no formula there, there's no you just pull it up and you, like, look for the person's body language. Am I right, or am I almost right?
Am I in the right
And if you know
ballpark?
you
Is it too
I
low?
mean
Is it
I mean
too
okay,
high?
nah, if the person does it, oh, okay, no, maybe I must. You see, I think that actually takes a shit ton of talent. And I mean, if they close you down there, not everybody can keep bouncing back and keep going back and keep going back. And I just think that thing is overlooked a lot. Just a last point before we move on to our next one. There was a good friend of mine. She's an incredibly. I'm a big fan of Cornelia's work. I think she's outstanding. Anyway, um, we were we were talking once, and she was like, when with a visual art, you have your art on the wall, and then you're standing now, you're waiting for people to look at your work, and then here somebody comes up and they ask you, how much do you charge for that? You have 5 seconds at most to make an impression. Because, yeah, your price might be there. Okay, they can see, but if they're asking you, what they're actually asking you is, can your work fit their budget? Now you must look at what they dress, what they look, everything, and you must think of a price within 5 seconds. And if you say your amount and you get a pushback, it's game over. You must
Mm,
find somebody else.
mm.
Like, that is that is uh I
It's a
think on
tough
my own
call
side.
to make. It's really a tough call to make, but I think it really comes down to how you value yourself. And as you said before, the reputation also you build around your work. Um, I've gotten to the point where I don't compromise on price,
Yeah, tell
especially
us about that.
because I do in the case of maybe where it's someone where I see really has the talent, right? But they struggle with the budget. I might have a little bit of leeway there. But when I know it's somebody, and I'm gonna I'm gonna say this, with a little tongue in cheek. If it's somebody I know who's got the budget, and it's somebody who I know is really publishing for boastful reasons, I'm gonna charge, what this project is worth. I'm not going to discount you if you ask me, Can't you do that? No, I know you have the budget for this. And if it was a bigger institution, you would not be asking for this discount. And obviously you came to me, and a lot of people, when they come to me, and I look at first how you approach me. If you say, I've heard, or somebody said you're the best for the, then obviously you are expecting you are
Yeah.
expecting me to produce quality. So pay me the worth of
Yeah.
that quality. And I think, it comes with time. I think that sort of balls
Yeah,
really just
experience.
comes with time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yep, yep, yep. Experience counts that. All the just like your talent and reputation. After a few years, the experience counts, and like you mentioned, I can also sniff it out. From
Mhm.
far, and that counts because I've been doing it for so long. That's also why that thing actually. Maybe I'm being a bit too honest, yeah, but it actually choked me because then we had COVID. And after
Mm,
that, I couldn't do that anymore. Um, I can't I can't do that hustle anymore. I can't.
mm,
It
uh,
it took more from me than it gave. And I only realized that ironically, like in isolation, talking to other artists. Like I just couldn't. But I don't really want to go too deep into that. But um, after COVID, I mean, you mentioned like the publishing business has since closed down, or if there's another, I don't know, safer word to use for that. But you are now a wellness coach. What? Was OMSA Pro Flow was it no Flow Wellington wellness coach. How do you pronounce that? Omsa Ku. Is that am I pronouncing that
Hu.
correctly?
It's koi koi. It's omsa
Yeah.
hu flow.
Um
Omsa coming from the word house. Oms. Hu of flow. House of flow. A lot of people think it's the Xhosa X, but it's koi koi. It's omsa hu flow. House of
that's
flow.
yeah, good for pointing that out. Yeah, language is an I've butchered so many things on this platform. Um it it's a different type of embarrassing, and I'm trying to embrace it as opposed to because if you make it awkward, it
No, you
sucks.
should. You should. And that is how we learn language. When we are young, we are able to consume language much easier because we don't have that embarrassment.
Yeah,
Kids
yeah,
will repeat what
yeah,
you say and they
yeah.
will mimic. And when we are in school and we're learning repetitively, we say the thing wrong, it is what it is. But as you get older, obviously, we have got masks
That's
and barriers and walls, and we don't want to look stupid, but we
yeah.
must speak and act, and that's how we learn.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
gonna I'm
I
gonna
can't, I can't even, I can't even begin to say. Because my son always asks me, "How do you say this in Khoikhoi?" I have no idea. I've got this much knowledge of my mother tongue. So even I butcher it.
um just a point on that real quick before we get to the own wellness coach. Yeah, that language is complicated. Um, I really struggle to besides just the clicking. I met let me just share the story real quick. It's a very brief. I was in Platfontein not too long ago. And we met uh, 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 a native. You was an MC, okay. And he sent us this track. It was maybe 4 minutes or so of where we been freestyling in one of these Khoi languages. That thing was. I mean, I didn't understand what they were saying, but just the clicking and other it was almost hypnotic. And then I realized, but I'm actually making this guy exotic. I'm trying to, like a fucking European. You come, you're like, ooh, like all the clicks, and Then I realized, oh man,
Mm,
god
mm,
damn it, I don't like that type of thing. Okay, yeah.
mm, mm.
Anyway, um, your wellness coach thing, how did it come to be? And for those that don't know, what is a wellness coach? What do they do?
So, I'll get to that. So you're saying that post COVID, I moved into that. I actually during COVID is where I began. I don't know if you know Quaz. Quaz was
Yeah,
always,
very well,
I was always joking.
very well.
Yeah, I was always joking with Quaz that I'm retiring every year. I was like, I wish people would stop sending me manuscripts because I'm retiring. I'm retiring. And when the company hit 10 years, we were in the midst of COVID at that time. I had a big celebration and a
Flo, just
party
just
and
just
things that
just pardon me, Mr. Sorry, there's a bit of a breakup here, no? Um,
I
there's a
was,
bit of a delay. Could you just repeat that? But when you're talking about Quas,
where was I? Yeah, so
you
Quaz
mentioned
always,
something of sending manuscripts, and somehow his name came up.
it's still reconnecting on my side.
Did you get that?
Yeah. So in the
Okay,
midst of COVID, I was
there's
always
a network
threatening.
delay here.
I was always threatening. Are you getting me?
Yeah, there's a network fucking delay here. Yes. Okay, just pause there if you can still hear me. Let this uh eh,
completely frozen now.
And this shit always happens around the 40-minute mark. God damn it. Hey, yeah, these type of things happen. Or firstly, can you hear me?
Quite clear.
Yeah, these things happen, yeah, every week. It's very boring. It's very, very boring. But I will edit that out. Just to touch on, we were talking about wellness coach, and you mentioned of knowing quite people sending manuscripts, and that's when the connection got a bit dear mekaar there. So can you just
Yeah,
pick it up from there?
I'll just pick it up from there.
Mm.
So you're saying in particular that post COVID, I moved from publishing into wellness coaching. Uh, I actually moved into fashion during COVID.
Okay.
Because back then we had just reached 10 years of poetry publications, and I was threatening, and Brent Quaz, you know Quaz.
Mm.
Um, I was always threatening year after year. No, I'm tired of all these manuscripts. I wish people would leave me alone. I'm retiring. I'm retiring year on year on year. I would joke, and then a new book would come out from published poetry publications, and Quaz would be like, I thought you're retiring, But during COVID was when I really I I wouldn't call it a sabbatical, but I did one book in the 2020 hard lockdown.
Okay.
And it was Tutukane and Glovo's My Poetic Collage, and it was the first South African poetry collection using augmented reality. So he played around with, a lot of um, AR stuff, and that's also when I was introduced to the idea that this could be an amalgamation. He did a lot of the tech stuff. He was very good on that. So, but I did one book during that 2020 year because I was able enough. I won't say fortunate. I was able to take a step back and evaluate. I was in a space where I was really thinking, do I want to continue with publishing? Am I still invested in this? This is where the world is right now. What's going on? How is it? Is it still feasible? Does it still make financial sense? Because
Yeah, I get it.
no one was doing anything. No one had the money to do anything. No one was, and obviously every year we have those scares of ebooks are
Yep.
taking over, AR is
Yep.
taking over, technology is moving in a different way. Is there still a space for books? Are people reading? Are people consuming? All those questions. So I really wanted to think that where are the next 10 years going for me in terms of my work and my vision and, all those sort of things. And I was also going through postnatal depression at the time. And I was really struggling and battling with creativity as a whole. And I needed something because I was now, as a publisher, I was no longer able to read for pleasure. I would pick up a book and I'd be judging that book from cover to cover. You
I
know,
know
I was
exactly what
reading
you're
it
talking about. I
right.
can relate.
I wasn't reading to consume the content. I was editing, you know. I couldn't anymore. Immediately when I would go to a book launch, I'd be there in the book launch. I'd enjoy what was being discussed. I liked, the topics and whatever. But immediately when I open the book, I'm looking at it from a publisher's eye. And that for me was very difficult as time went by, because now I was no longer enjoying the process. Um, I was also not writing anymore. Right before COVID, I had put out my second book, How Trained, which was doing very well at the time. But now I was no longer writing. I didn't have the space. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the mental capacity to be creative in that sense, because I was work driven, you know, and I was just not there anymore. So and this the fashion part of it was really, it started as a short course to spark that creativity again and to really redirect me from what I've been doing my whole life as a writer, because writing was my creative outlet. So I chose something completely random and I did this course in fashion, and now I was making clothes, and it was being driven more again by spirit and calling, where is this going? Am I going to use it? Is it just a hobby? And I'm a firm believer that not every hobby should be scaled and monetized. I really think that hobbies,
I agree there
the internet
100%.
has really made us believe that you must monetize everything,
Everything must be
but with this,
monetized. Suck the life out of everything.
right? But with this particular thing, I looked at where I was in my own personal life. And now I had this child who I'm supposed to teach about heritage and culture. And I don't live amongst my people. I don't live in the community where you can experience how I grew up and, what our heritage is and that sort of thing. And I looked at what the fashion industry was presenting in terms of our indigenous culture, and there's a huge gap there, and it pushed me in that direction. So then that's where Umsafu Flow started, because then it was House of Flow Designs, and it's still House of Flow Designs with House of Flow Wellness. So that's been going all these years. But then over the last few years, having diving more into my heritage and reclaiming and language and all that. There's also the side, a lot of people wanna label themselves as a healer, or they're calling this, that, and the other. And it's a very complicated and layered thing in terms of where in the culture you fit in South Africa for you to be able to associate with that sort of thing. And for me, I find that I'm in a place now where that is surfacing more. Um, but not every healer has the calling to Twata. To put it that way. There are other forms. And I had always had an interest in behavioral psychology, in child psychology, in all sorts of the broad spectrum of psychology. When I was at varsity, I studied marketing, and I despised it with my entire life. But in my spare time, I read all the psychology material. I had friends who was doing psychology, so I was reading their textbooks. So that is where this part of my life was driven by. Also because I have the dream of starting a wellness center that specifically caters for women in postnatal depression, especially young women who go through childbirth, teenage mothers. Because when I was going through it, it was a new thing to me. I wasn't aware that this thing existed. We come from a culture where it's not spoken about, it's not open, So I went on these studies in terms of how do you manage and deal with anxiety, depression, specifically around postnatal depression. And that is where also Flow Wellness came from.
Yeah, it came
Because
about.
now, yes, now my practice is centered around stress management, anxiety management, guided meditation, coaching, in particular men. Yeah, we say that men are not interested in this, but there are a few. But women and
I'm
children in
interested in
particular,
those things.
how do you manage stress and anxiety um, in the workplace, in schools, home life balance, that sort of thing?
You know, Flo, let me just point out on two things. First, it's just a technical thing, and I mean, I'm gonna see how best I can do it. But because of that break in transmission, the audio and the visual seems a bit iffy. But I'll see what I can do around that. But just another point. Interesting, like how you sort of developed, like as times have moved. Post COVID, how social, politically and economically things have changed. How you sort of flowed with that into where you are, because the whole wellness thing, the data that I have and the artists I speak to, I think that thing is probably more needed now. People are dealing with some heavy shit. And it's not going
Mm,
away. In fact, it's getting worse. Um,
mm,
so that's actually a very interesting avenue for the arts. I have a few friends, but this is like early on, that used to use music as a form of therapy, theater as a form of therapy, visual art as a form of therapy. But it was a very
mm.
something that was always on the fringe. It's almost like a side hustle, where now it's a full on thing. So I think that's fascinating, actually. Just one question on the
And you know what? What
please
I
continue.
find is an interesting thing in terms of us as a Black community. We find it very it's considered very woo woo still. I don't know why. You know, it's some people look at it as, are we connecting? Do you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Some people look at it as it's white people stuff, or it's religious based, or so I don't want to associate with it, but it's so vital, and something I specifically urge people of color is to seek healers of color. And I say healers when I talk about therapists, I talk about doctors, I talk about
Yeah, I get
psychologists,
you.
and that
I
sort of
get you.
thing. I think it's very important, and artists as well, to seek people in that specific space and sphere who have knowledge of whatever you
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
specifically dealing with, whether it's community, whether it's culture, whether it's race, whether, you know, so that there is that barrier that gets crossed for the initial introduction. Because we tend to seek help from people who don't understand us, one, as a people, two, mentally, where we are economically, demographically, and I emphasize that a lot. People of color must seek out people of color.
Hmm. I like that. You're actually giving me something to think about there. There's a point there. I don't necessarily want to put it on this podcast. That very interesting point there. Hmm. I guess you kind of answered the one question, because I was gonna sort of ask, like, how does the wellness coach operate? Um, like, say for example, because you're talking about, specifically to women dealing with, I forgot what that name was, that a specific issue. How does it work? How does your retreats work, and how long does it take, and so forth?
So I how I started initially was to do group sessions. where it's a session that's guided in terms of breath work, stress management, and it's called the garden sessions with Flow Wellington. So people would come and we gather and we sit and we relax. We start off with a little bit of, de-stressing, the normal icebreaker type things to just get you comfortable with the space. I teach about breath work through different times of the day, how that can assist you in terms of stress management, whether you are at work, whether you are at school, whether whatever um, time of the day it is. And then also guided meditation. Specifically, I say guided meditation because you're not in a state of bliss. You're not just left like in a spa where the music is in the background and you get to float away. I specifically draw you into yourself, into your body, where you focus on specific areas. Like, let's say a client comes to me and they say they are struggling with pain in a specific area. And then we will focus on body movements linked to that area. And we will focus on sound energy around that area. We'll focus on bringing your mind body connection during the meditation to that area, and how meditation and sound healing and focused breath work brings that calm into management of that specific thing. So it's breath work around stress management. What's the word I'm looking for? Sound healing, meditation healing. I'm also branching off into workplace management, because we have this notion that when we say team building, that it must be adventure and it must be, pushed to the limits, and we must go bungee jump with our boss. And a lot of the times the team just needs to come together and sit and learn how to be vulnerable with each other, learn how to allow space within the workplace from employee to employer. How do we manage during the day tough situations individually and as a group? Because I think we forget that our humanness gets lost when we are on a routine. We become cogs in the machine and we just go by, go by, go by. At the end of the day, you're out of breath and you get home and you are struggling whereas if you learn specific coping mechanisms to take you through the day, you're able to bring yourself to that calm, bring your home space, your workspace. You're able to
Hmm.
deal with a lot of things a lot better.
Hmm. Hmm.
The problem
Thanks
doesn't
for that.
obviously go away because
Yeah.
there's practical and reality and there's real life things, but you as a person within yourself, you're able to better manage a situation.
So you're basically just providing people with tools to deal with the situation. Is that correct?
Mm,
Hmm. Thanks for that.
100%. 100%.
Thanks for that. Um, yeah, I sort of want to wrap up here, man. Wow. Like I mentioned, of life is a really interesting journey. I find it fascinating, sort of how you move with the different times, how your art adapted to everything, and sort of in that way remaining relevant. Because there's nothing more topical right now in 2026 than this. Um, Nothing. I think it's actually the biggest. Like I mentioned, I interviewed some other lady. I think it was 2 years ago. On that, and even with some of the other productions that I'm previewing and other artists I'm previewing, there's a lot of healing elements to their work now as well. I guess just subconsciously artists have noticed that that's a trend, and they're sort of adapting their talent in and around that. So yeah, man, just sort of in wrapping, like if people are interested in the wellness coach retreats, how do they get hold of you? What social media handles are there and so forth?
Mainly social media. A lot of people ask me, so website and things. I don't feel there's a lot of place for a website right now in terms of
Websites
where
are
we are with. social
websites
media,
is
you
a
know.
very 10 years ago thing. Not many people have
Yeah,
that. So
I find it
it's not a thing anymore.
it's definitely still relevant for some things, but
Not
any
for what we
person
do.
who is on their lunch break who is scrolling a specific thing, or and somebody actually said to me the other day that TikTok is their new Google. You know,
Hmm?
you search for hair
That's a
and
problem, just though,
it
by the
will
way.
be.
It's a different conversation, but that is dodgy.
It's
The
a
person
very
who
different
says that, I
conversation. I
wouldn't
know.
trust what's coming out of that person's mouth, eh? Just
I don't
heads up.
at all. At all. But I mean, that's where we are. So to reach me, it's easy via my Instagram, um, or on Facebook. Facebook is also very vintage, but a lot of my older clients are on Facebook still.
Yeah.
So my Instagram for sure. Omsa underscore flow. Omsa flow wellness. Yeah. Omsa underscore flow underscore wellness.
Yeah,
Um,
and obviously I'll add all
Also
those oh, sorry, there's more. Please continue.
email omsafuflow@gmail.com. Quick and easy. I don't take too long to reply unless I'm busy with something, or you know. But yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
I'll add all those
and
details in the description box there below as well. So if you missed it,
oh.
you can definitely catch it there.
But
Yeah,
just to add, for poetry publications, you know, I do still consult a lot. I do one-on-one workshops. I do consulting work for festivals, you know, that sort of thing. Um, I now in the last year or so I did more work in terms of second editions for authors, people who want to bring out a second and a third print run, who want to do translation work, that sort of thing. You know, even though I'm not doing full on publications, there is still the platform and the access in terms of I need advice on XYZ, or I need prints, or I need a translation work done. I do obviously still freelance a lot with writing and that sort of thing, but
yeah, I
it is
get it.
still there.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, like I mentioned, I'll add all those extra details in the description box there below.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a while that I had to speak about myself. Mm. Mm. And you often wonder where certain artists have gone. You know, you don't see them in the space anymore. You wonder, you know, are they still around? Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're not creative. Yeah. And things that I found also with people I worked with 5, 10 years ago, you know, who probably let me say who came onto the scene 5, 10 years ago. some people say, no, I don't hear or see anything. It's because they've moved into a different kind of work. I think about, like how I said with TK, who does augmented reality with his poems. Last year, Kavito Billy came to me with his second edition. And I mean, yes, he brought out this book, but he works a lot in the AI space, and he works a lot with an augmented reality in how poetry is taken into the tech space. So, and now with Modise as well, that works with jazz musicians. People are producing work. They are moving with how technology is moving. And I think that's also part of why I decided to step back with poetry publications, because, like I said, I don't want to be known as or part of that gatekeeping, in terms of how people are producing the work. Because I feel that there are indie publishers who are coming up now who are better versed in the tech space, who can offer that sort of thing. Whereas I would maybe consider myself as a more vintage vanity press. Yeah, or traditional in that. Yeah. Okay. Mm, mm. No, I think it would be nice for you to talk with TK and with Fabiso, who are in that space. So I'll send you links and stuff. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, because for us who are writers and who have always made our money from writing, now we get the question. And when I first got the response of, did you use AI for this work? I mean, I think I was working on some workshop material, or policy writing for a client, and they asked me, did I use AI for this? It took me right back to high school. My high school teachers used to ask on my essay work and my composition work, is this your own work? I I sort of feel like we are right back there as writers, with now, where a lot of people are writing full on books and book reports. I mean, people are winning awards now, writing with. And Mm, mm. It is. It definitely is. I mean, you find if you look at LinkedIn and you go and you search writing jobs, the first 10, 20 would be for an AI trainer or an AI prompt writer or, that sort of thing. There's very few le- like traditional writing jobs out there anymore if you're not well versed in training an AI system, and it's scary. It's you want to stay on top of things and you want to learn. I told one of my clients the other day, she was asking, so are you also, what, like, I'm not knocking AI. I use, some systems to automate a lot of my work every day, but she's like, are you also jumping on the AI bandwagon? And I'm like, when AI takes over, some of us have to teach your children how to plant vegetables. Some of us will be teaching your children how to regulate their nervous system. Mm. Mm. Thank you, Kai Gargan. My pleasure. Thanks.